Today's guest is Elliot Adams, who's going to talk a little bit about no-code tools for super productivity. And I think we're going to get a good overview of what does that all mean. So we're going to be talking about how we can take our inefficient processes and systems and build out these custom solutions that don't necessarily require us to hire a software developer. So we'll look at ways you can automate and organize your workflows to save you time, because obviously technology is not actually why you showed up here. And of course, I misspelled poor Elliot's name. There should be two T's there. So Elliot Adams is the founder of Privacy Brain, a mission-driven privacy tech startup. He teaches courses on entrepreneurship, internet privacy, and no-code tools at Stanford and Berkeley. And so with this, I am going to get out of the way and let the expertise flow to you. So let us do it. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Elliot Adams.
Eli, thank you. Thank you very much. And I will admit, it's not the first time my name has been misspelled, so don't feel terrible about that. So I'm so glad to be here. Let me just share my slides, and you can let me know if they're up. So is that showing my slides? Is that working for everyone?
Yes, you're there.
Wonderful. Great. Yeah, so thanks to TechSoup Vancouver for having me, obviously. Vancouver is one of my favorite cities in the world. If Canada would have me, I might well renounce my citizenship. We won't have to go into that right now. So today we want to go into essentially an overview and work our way into some specific examples of what no-code is and how it can be used. Earlier, as we're getting started, Eli was mentioning he's using Zapier and Airtable. We're going to talk about those two in particular, and a few others along the way. So I believe Eli and Ben are going to be manning the chat room. As questions come up, obviously feel free to throw those in, and we can talk through those.
Elliot, on the one screen before this one, it was just focused on just you and your computer. You were kind of out of camera or out of center. You're okay now, but the first screen that came up, you were off to one side.
Okay, but it's looking okay now?
Yeah, it is. I just wanted to mention that because before we could just see your shoulder. So
okay.
Just so you know.
Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, if it changes, let me know.
Okay.
Thanks, Ben. So we're here today talking about what you can do with no-code tools. As the event description, I wanted to make sure we hit on that, where we can automate and organize workflows to save time and energy. And as Eli pointed out, it's, of course, not just about doing so for the fun of it, although for me it is kind of, but for you, it's about enacting more change, right, and moving your organizations forward. As Eli mentioned, I have a privacy tech startup. I teach in California. I'm on the board for South by Southwest. And much of what you'll hear today is from the course I teach called Building Applications Without Programming, the No-Code Revolution. So today, it's three things. Understanding what no-code is, although that's not particularly straight ahead all the time, as Eli mentioned earlier. Recognize how no-code can help your organization. I hope that's somewhat self-evident through the sort of benefits we're going to see here. And then we're going to look at some relevant example of no-code. So that's going to break down into sort of an intro piece, a key concept, and then a small case study on using actually Zapier and Airtable. So first concept here is talk about no-code, and no-code does not mean no work, right? So we have to think like a programmer, even though we're not necessarily writing out code. And there's a great quote from the CEO of GitHub saying, programming isn't about typing, it's about thinking. And so all of you are highly capable professionals that are great at critical thinking and organizing. And so that means you can use those skills to bring the no code and be effective in this realm. Again, even though you're not writing software. That said, there are some skill sets that could give you a leg up, and I just want to point those out. So being really like an Excel wizard is one, if you're familiar with a lot of Excel formulas and just using tabular data. Of course, knowing how to write software helps. You are already thinking of the structures of applications and things like that. But I find that there are many developers who will use a no-code platform in lieu of writing it from scratch, just for efficiency's sake. So it's very relevant to these folks too. If you're in product management or you're working, in a tech company, you're just kind of exposed to these things a lot more. That can help. And lastly, if you're already familiar with methodologies of building things like design thinking or the lean startup methodology, that helps too. Again, that said, you could have none of these qualifications and there's still a lot of opportunity for you. So what can you do? So at a very high level, there's kind of 3 buckets I think of what you can achieve with no code. Making database-driven applications. What does that mean? So, most applications where you go to the website, you log in, you start using it, whether that's Salesforce or Gmail or whatever it is, those are all just web apps, so-called, that have a database behind them. And we can make those with no code. There are a lot of limitations, and those are, I would say, best for kind of proofs of concept. It's tougher to scale up those, both from a cost point of view and from a technology point of view, but that is one thing you can do. We're going to look today a bit more at things like connecting existing applications you're using. So on Eli's mock-up of here's a lot of money you can save with TechSoup, which is amazing. I wish I was a nonprofit. You could connect most, if not all, those applications through tools like Zapier, which Eli mentioned we're going to talk about. You can also create apps inside of an internal workspace, so-called. And this is kind of where the no-code definition gets more fuzzy. These days, more and more tools that you may already use, SaaS tools, web apps, whatever, may already have some automation and no-code-like capabilities and tendencies. And so some people say no-code is just this kind of stuff in the middle of connecting things. Some people think of it as like building apps that actually writing code. So there's a lot of room for debate here, and we just want to pick out what's going to be useful for us, essentially. So with that, I'm going to focus mostly on this today, and then I think we have time to just talk a little bit more about how this kind of plays out. Okay, so for quick background, how we are where we are with no code being very popular. Companies like Airtable and Zapier and many others have raised a lot of money, or they're doing really well. And just a quick history of how we are to where we are today. So of course, I'm sure we all know, early days of computers was really kind of a DIY era of like Steve Wozniak going to the computer hobbyist club in Palo Alto. But obviously very high barriers to entry, right? Like this was when computers and software had a user manual because they weren't intuitive, right? So that was obviously the earliest age. The big, quantum leap was the personal software revolution. And this kind of gets into what leads us to no code, because with the PC, you're using a spreadsheet and you're, in effect programming in some cases, doing calculations, and you're doing it all with a very, supposedly easy to use graphical interface. Of course, at the time, this is kind of revolutionary. This is VisiCalc, the original spreadsheet. But this was kind of the first inkling of, we as so-called citizen developers using computers to manipulate them in ways we couldn't if we had to write the software ourselves. So kind of right up until our present day, we of course have this era of web apps and SaaS products, so-called. And we're familiar with all this stuff. Google Sheets, Google Docs, Salesforce, all kinds of tools like that we use, Gmail, et cetera. What makes it possible are the underlying structures. So open source software is this incredible propellant of innovation. The cost of computing is so low with cloud computing that companies can build a no-code product, host it on the cloud, and then still have this huge margin to charge us to use their no-code product, right? And if the economics weren't as such, that wouldn't be possible. And what's interesting is you think of traditional software development on one end of the spectrum as, just the code from like the Matrix or something. And then the other end of the spectrum is what we're going to look at today, which is very user-friendly stuff. And what's interesting is it's kind of all coming from the sides and meeting in the middle with what's called low code. And the short story is that low code makes it easier for a developer to write code, and it's more modular, and they have sort of more things they can build on top of. And so that's even making it to where no code tools are being built faster. So it's this kind of big snowball effect. That's what I'm getting to. One last thing I want to touch on in this piece. It's a little technical, it's a little abstract, but it's worth understanding, I think, for our audience today. APIs may be a concept you're familiar with, but if you're not, an API is simply a way to interact with a program or a piece of software or a service is one great way of thinking about it. And so if you look at this chart, we've got things like Google Maps, Stripe payments. Some of these are probably less well known, but Auth0 is for logging people in, SendGrid is for email, on and on and on. And there's, thousands and thousands of APIs. The reason it's relevant is because these are all tools we can leverage easier with no code. So no code can make it easier to use Google Maps in our applications, to integrate Stripe, to send emails with SendGrid. And those are all things that may be really critical to what you're building, whether it's an internal or externally facing product. And because you can, for example, use SendGrid to send lots of email, not spam, you don't have to spin up your own email service, or you can use Stripe, which is so dead easy to use compared with how it was in the bad old days of the aughts and trying to take payments online. So I bring this up again, it's a bit technical, but these are more tools we can use at a sort of secondary level with our no-code applications. Right, and so I want to do one more quick piece here, how we got to now. This is, I think, good perspective because, again, we can debate what no-code is or isn't. Back in the 90s, we may remember Dreamweaver. Then, of course, we got into WordPress, Drupal. I think these things are probably tools you're familiar with. Now, more recently, things like Shopify and Squarespace are very popular. And really what we're talking about today with these no-code tools is the kind of logical extension, if you will. They're more interoperable. If you think about a WordPress, it's fairly well defined. It's like you can see how it looks and you can do the content on the back end, but these tools we look at today really allow you to expand far beyond that. And there's a lot happening with it. This is one blogger built this mapping last year. It's a lot to take in, but you got things that can build products, do automation, chatbots, scrape data. There's sort of these database spreadsheet type tools. Today, I'm just going to quickly focus on essentially two of these categories. One are the connectors. And so Zapier is the one we've mentioned so far. Integromat's another great one. Parabola, there's many of these. And then the other section are these database / spreadsheet kind of programs. And we probably all use Google Sheets, but tools like Airtable are really interesting because what they do is they unlock the power of a database without the technical overhead of using a database. And if you're not a database proficient person, which I'm not, you try to spin up a MySQL database, it's either going to be hellish or a complete failure. It's just very hard to know how to do this stuff. So Airtables and other ones you can see there, very popular because they give the benefits of a relational database, which is sort of a higher level of storing data than a single table spreadsheet, but it's quite accessible. And so why does it matter? Well, it's easier to iterate, right? So we can quickly put something up, make a change, modify it. It can happen very quickly. As opposed to using a software development house, if we're not writing software ourselves, we have to go to that software development house and say, here are these new requirements, make these changes, and then in a week or two, they might get back to you, right? So we have the means of production to get Marxist with it. Of course, it's easier to learn. The learning curve is there. It's not no work, just no code, but far easier than just saying, I'm going to learn a program, right? Lower cost. This is one of the big things about no code is that even if you have a software development team on your staff, almost always they have a huge backlog of things they need to do in your core technology products, excuse me. With no code, what you can essentially do is not continue to burden that software development team and assign those projects to be solved with no code. So that means you can have perhaps a smaller tech team, or you can just have a more efficient tech team. The last reason it matters is kind of all these things put together in this notion of citizen developers, which is what you and I are. I mean, all the things we do, even down to a small customization and how Gmail takes in a message and this or that. I mean, we are like the everyman developer, every person developer, I should say. So one more set of trends. We're going to get on some examples here really quick. What's driving this is, of course, there are not enough developers, and that's why labor costs are really high. What I call the lean startup gap, which we'll look at a graph for in a second. That's basically where this iteration piece I mentioned earlier can't be achieved as quickly, right? And in exactly the same way, it's the dilemma of someone who's a non-technical entrepreneur or intrapreneur inside of your own organization. And in this case, meaning the cost to have someone build something is going to be really enormous compared to probably what your resources are. And so it stifles bringing your own vision to life, right? That lean startup cycle I mentioned, if you haven't seen this, it's kind of, for better or worse, it's gospel in Silicon Valley, which is that you build something, build a product, you measure how it works and how your users interact with it and so forth. And then you learn from that and you keep the cycle going. So the quicker we can do that cycle, the iteration cycle, the better. And that's, again, one of the benefits here of no code. So a key concept are triggers and actions. And I'll explain what those mean. We're going to look at Zapier. Zapier is the most popular program to connect your different applications. Last time I heard, they can connect about 3,000 different applications. So that's anything from emails, systems, CRM systems, CMS systems, messaging systems, all kinds of things, and all kinds of, kind of innumerable permutations of how you can connect applications. One reason I really like Zapier and I recommend it is because their documentation on getting started is really, really good. And just as a product, it's pretty intuitive, and they've really been improving it over the last couple of years. So what can you do with it? So I'm just going to walk you through some screenshots here that just show you what it's like to be in Zapier. I think that kind of helps tell the story a bit. So triggers and actions, right? First thing we have to have is a trigger. So we define something that when it happens, they will then cause an action to be executed, right? This other thing will happen once the trigger is triggered. And let's do an example. So we can see here, if you can see that on your screen well enough, there's a search bar. It says search apps, and it gives you a bunch of examples of things you can choose: MailChimp, Slack, etc. As I say, there's like 3,000 more. But let's look at Twitter. And so you'd set a trigger here and say, okay, for Twitter, I'm going to log into Twitter through Zapier. And here are all of these options. So a trigger could be when a certain user sends a tweet, when a certain person likes a tweet, on and on and on. So why don't we choose, in this case, when someone gets a new follower? It could be us, or it could be another user. That's our trigger. Now we have to decide, well, when someone gets a new follower, like, how do we want to capture that information exactly? And we could do it in any number of ways. We could send ourselves an email. We could create a new spreadsheet row in Google Sheets. And in these examples with this action, we could take any parts of the data. So with the person who liked or has a new follower, excuse me, we could catalog that follower and what's their Twitter handle, how many followers do they have, what's the text of their latest tweet. There's all kinds of data associated with that, and we could put it, in this case, in columns in Google Sheets and just get kind of a bird's eye view of who these followers are. We could also make a new card in Trello. And maybe for our internal project planning, we want to track followers of certain people in Trello, and who knows. We could kind of make it recursive and do something else in Twitter, so to speak, where we add that person who's a follower to a new Twitter list. And as you can, I think, probably gather, you can just kind of go on and on and on. You can have not just a two-step where it's one trigger, one action, but one trigger that kind of cascades a list of actions. So you can see here on the screen, we could, add this person to our own list. We make a spreadsheet row. We could do a new card in Trello. All these things put together. And yeah, I mean, you could just kind of have this endless series of events. And then some of these can trigger other things. So you can start pretty shallow waters, and then, as with many tools, you can go pretty deep on it. I want to show you another example of a great tool. It's similar to Zapier, but it's a bit more powerful. It's probably something you want to learn to use second, once you kind of get the basics of this trigger action mindset. And it's called Integromat, and essentially it's very similar to Zapier, but you can do more powerful things with it, and you can, I think, more easily make very complicated sequences of something being triggered and all these other things happening as actions. So I want to show you just some examples. So, we can start out and do something really basic. Like in this case, someone fills out a form and it puts their information into our database. Great example of, we might have to write code for that. It wouldn't be fun. This makes it easy. One example that's relevant to this, actually, in teaching I do, is that I was trying to figure out a way to take a screenshot, have it go to Dropbox, and then have it automatically make a new Google slide in a slide presentation. And so if you can see this here on your screen, this was a little clock symbol is saying it's going to check for a new file in this Dropbox folder every so often, every hour or 15 minutes or something. And then this next step would be it grabs that file, also in Dropbox. That's the second piece. And then it puts in this thing called Convert API, which I kind of forgot exactly what it does, but I think it's like an image manipulation thing. And then in the fourth step, it creates a new Google slide. And in the last step, it actually uploads that image from the Convert API onto the Google slide that you've just made. So, relatively complex, and compared to having to take the screenshot, open Google Slides, and paste it in, if it's all happening totally automatically, could save some time. This is another example. This is something for my company. This was like something one of our teammates built, and I don't honestly fully understand it, but I just want to give you a sense of how far this can go. So these icons toward the bottom, like JSON, an array aggregator, an iterator, those are basically programming, sort of components, but you can use them in this very visual way. And so it kind of takes the extreme, the think like a programmer idea, because if you know how to, in this example, so JSON is referred to as JSON. If you can take the JSON data, let's see if I can do this. Well, basically, if you can take this data and kind of know what to do with it, know how to munge it around, and then push it to these blue icons in a row here, that's Airtable, do certain insertions in Airtable and modifications in Airtable, and then at the end, it sends you an email update. Yeah, kind of to say there's a flexibility that's, I think, on par with what you get with programming. So yeah, again, there's just a lot you can do as you get rolling and kind of familiar with the tools. So the last thing I want to show you today is a very concrete walkthrough of something I actually do with my Stanford course to illustrate how this no-code stuff can work. And then maybe for a couple minutes, I want to share some things about native integrations, but let me show you this example first. So I teach this course twice a year at Stanford. That's a short course on no-code. And I was thinking of like, how can I illustrate this? So I email all the students before it starts, and I say, please fill out a survey. Here's the link. And what they get is, this is an Airtable survey. So I mentioned Airtable. If you're not familiar with it, it's a database. It kind of looks like a spreadsheet, and you can easily take it and
Hey, Elliot, that's coming through a
yes,
little small. Could you just bump up your browser size?
that's actually a video.
Oh, no worries. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. So just to say, you can just make a form really easily in Airtable. And what I asked them to do is fill out the form, and then that's kind of all I say. What happens is they fill the form out, and I was doing this as an example. So I put in Leland Stanford's name as kind of a joke. And then I went to Zapier, and I set up just a simple trigger and action. When they fill the survey out, it creates a new record in Airtable. So that's our first step. So what we're doing here is simply turning on Zapier and saying, look, when there's a new entry from this form into Airtable, that's our trigger, right? New record. And so you just configure it and say, which Airtable account is it? And which table is it going to go into? Basically letting it know where to look for the new form submission. And then, so they filled the form out. And then this is what Airtable looks like. I know this is kind of small, so bear with me. It's not really super important that you see everything that's happening, but just what I want to show you is that the form they filled out has populated a new row in Airtable, like a new spreadsheet row, same thing. And that's, again, what's going to trigger us the first part of this in Zapier. So here in Zapier, you can kind of test it out, and it shows, you can see there, Leland Stanford is the example that's pulled out of Airtable, saying like, is this the right thing you want to be triggering on? So that's our trigger. The second piece is sending an email. And this is pretty straightforward as well. You just say, okay, whatever the trigger is, doesn't matter. Send an email, tie it to my email address, and the action. These are all the details you can put in. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, well, who do I send it to? Well, I'm going to grab the email address that they put in the form. I can just grab that from the last step in the action, in the trigger, pardon me. And this is one thing that really gets in sort of the cool customization you can do here. Let's see if I can pause this. So again, I know that's very small, but if you can see these white bubbles, like there's one toward the top that says first name Leland, what I'm doing there is I'm saying we're going to take this email and customize it based on what they put in the form. So it's going to say, hi, Leland, but it could say, hi, Ben, hi, Eli, whatever they filled out in the form. And then I say, I kind of explain like what's happening with this app in this email that I send them, gives them some background on it. And then it sends it out. So it sends it out with that custom information inside of it. And so they get the email, as you can see, just a normal email. It's customized for them. Toward the bottom, I know it's a lot of text here, but it says, if the email address you entered in the form, which is this fake one I made up for Stanford, matches the email when you set up for the course, an Airtable automation will associate your survey answers with the name in the course roster. And that's a little bit out of scope for what we can talk about today, but essentially what I'm doing is saying, if they put in the same email as what they registered with, Airtable itself is going to do kind of a trigger action thing and connect those two records between two different tables. So hopefully that's making sense. I want to talk about one more thing, and then certainly can open up to any questions. This is what I referred to really back at the beginning, native integrations. So we talked about building database-driven apps. We talked about connecting existing applications. And the last one is building automations inside of applications you're already using. And this is probably the easiest on-ramp to no-code. So one example I think is great is Trello. If you haven't used it, it's a great project management tool. It's very flexible. It's kind of unopinionated. It just allows you to do a lot of stuff with organizing and tracking tasks usually. But built right into Trello are integrations for Slack and Adobe and Jira. So, and way more than that. I mean, they've got Salesforce, you can see Hubstaff, et cetera, et cetera. So what's great about it is if you're a Trello user, or even new to Trello, the distance you have to go to have an automation or to link Trello to another application is really short. And Trello's done a lot of work, and a lot of these companies do a lot of work now to make these as sort of easy as possible. But it's really the same principle of connecting applications. You just kind of cut out the middleman, and that can make it a bit easier. So you can see, for example, in Slack, like they have their own giant list of programs you can interact with Slack. And so just to kind of contextualize it in a different way, you could connect Slack and Trello through Zapier. That would work great. But you don't have to anymore. And that's the native integration piece. So you can just do it. You can do Dropbox and Slack. But again, these are all things these apps have built inside themselves. And it's kind of a macro trend. I think we'll see that more and more going forward, where you'll open up your favorite web app and it'll say, do you want to connect to XYZ? We've got a great way of doing it. So it makes it that much easier. So I think we'll have some time for Q&A. I just want to say that if you're interested in learn more, first of all, there's a ton of resources out there. There's great stuff on YouTube. There's an organization called MakerPad, which has lots of educational stuff. I do offer this course, and this is through continuing studies, actually, which means that anyone is free to join if you're interested. We're doing another cohort of it. I think it starts in a couple of weeks. So if that's of interest, you can find it on Stanford's continuing studies site. There is an organization I'm working with called PixelRamp, and basically the idea is that it's a no-code agency consultancy. And so if you're looking for any like professional help with a no-code project, you could reach out to us on that. But otherwise, I appreciate your time, and I hope it was helpful, and certainly happy to talk about any questions the group might have.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Super appreciate you giving us a good tour of just where no code is at and some of the solutions we could potentially bring into our day-to-day work. There are some questions that have been percolating. Let me start walking through some of those. So the first one we've got comes from Helen Lamb. And Helen Lamb says, like, as a government-funded nonprofit, they've got all kinds of like privacy and data hosting concerns to be thinking about. And I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about, like, some of the risks and things we should be paying attention to around data hosting, and if we give access to one of these tools that automates into another tool, what happens if one of those tools gets hacked?
Yeah, it's a great question, and especially more so with the responsibility of an agency like that. So this is why it's important, intrinsically, I think we all understand this, to choose the right tools. So the downside of choosing the newest, greatest, shiniest new no-code tool is that they may not have, for example, what's called a SOC 2 certification. If you don't know, that's like a very hard to get security certification. It takes over a year. So like if someone has a SOC 2 and someone has, what's the other one? The ISO certification, those are really good signs. Those are kind of the buying signals that big companies look for when they try new software. I will say one more thing, which is that if you go, there's a company that my friend runs called City Grows. It's just citygrows.com. They specialize in making no code for governments. And so they have a lot of knowledge about, like, I don't think they do RFPs, but like purchase orders and making the data secure to fit government requirements and so forth. They're a US-based entity, but that might be something you at least look into as well.
Awesome. So I've got a question here coming in from Alex, who says, I've been happily using Asana as a project management and process management tool. And I was wondering if, just in this case of Airtable, where do you think like some potential use cases for nonprofits might look like?
Well, so Asana is a good example of something that is working toward being kind of an all-in-one solution. Monday.com is another example of that. And with those tools, the advantage is everything's in one place, and you're just kind of limited to what they can do. Using Airtable, I can't really speak to necessarily the use cases, but if you think about the reason why you would use, say, Airtable, Zapier, and some other app is because there's a functionality or a feature that you're not going to be able to get inside of Asana, right? That's the reason to go outside of Asana, is to say, oh, well, like we want to integrate with this payment thing or this API for whatever, Twilio. And so in that case, like it's just something you need to go out and use. But Asana may in many ways give you what you need. And there's no reason to spend too much of your precious time just researching tools if you're already, getting everything you need through Asana.
Awesome. Cougar, if you want to come off mic next, I'd love for you to go deeper into your question.
Hi there. I've been an amateur hobbyist for 20 years. And I've been working with PHP. I'm also a writer. I've got a lot of other things I'm doing, and I am now probably slowing down because I'm 70 years old. So programming is no longer something that I feel like it's easy for me. Never was, but it's less easy now.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm working with what I wanted. I mean, I've been sort of working with PHP, and I've been learning stuff about how to write modules and things like that. I've got some examples that I've done. And one thing I'm visualizing for the future is having a way so that someone could interact with my automated web apps, which are which have a purpose. I don't want to go into them right now, but they're very interactive. And then I wanted to have that be able to save that to the user's private, say, Google Docs account or something like that. Now, that involves I can see the privacy issues there. I'm just wondering how which of these tools is best to handle that kind of thing. And also I have another question, which I'd like to throw the two of them together. With the PHP that I've been working, and the JavaScript and all that stuff, jQuery, I'm working on having, sort of a main page which has a lot of plugins depending on what I need for that particular app. So my intention is to write a library of plugins that I will use for my apps. And I'm wondering if the no-code options that you are talking about could replace the overall framework so that all I have to work on is the plugins.
I see. Okay.
Two questions, in other words.
Yeah, that's fine. No, that's good. The first one, I think I can give you a quick example of. So if you wanted to take some of this data that your users are generating and push it to Google Drive, I might recommend you consider, you could push it to Airtable and then have an automation inside of Airtable that would push it into Google Drive. But the truth is, for both these questions, your applications are sufficiently complicated where it might actually be more complicated to integrate no-code stuff. You might in some cases be kind of bending over backwards to do so. And in your case, what I might recommend you consider, because you do have development chops, is looking at some simpler coding things like serverless functions, like GCP's Cloud Functions or AWS Lambda functions, which are, if you haven't seen them, just really discrete code containers that just fire off for a single function. And I don't want to get too into it because it's kind of off topic, but I would look at some of those so-called low-code tools, starting with functions, that may make your app less kind of monolithic and complicated. So I hope that's helpful, but I think you're probably, in a sense, almost too advanced for some of the no-code being useful for you.
So I've got another question here from Ivan, going deeper into the security questions, asking Elliot if you can speak more about the perils of using no code in like a nonprofit, around, specifically his concerns are around proliferation of unsecure processes. I think, Ivan, if you want to go deeper into that, but I'm suspecting you're like, there are things that you just are hard to track when something triggers another thing and off it goes.
So kind of not knowing what the no code is up to, if it's kind of off the track, you mean, or if
I might be in that direction. Ivan, please correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm also just going to give you the mic ability just in case. Make sure I've got you in the right direction.
Can you hear me there?
I
You're
can
in.
now.
Go for it.
Thank you, Elliot. My question was a little bit related to the pros and cons, the benefits and the challenges. When you have a small nonprofit and you sort of unleash the citizen programmers, and then there is the same challenge that we're seeing with Microsoft Teams is like suddenly you have 6,000 teams, and then we have to call a professional, an adult, to get it fixed. And what is your experience when you have seen small organization whose core skill is not designing apps or secure processes? Is your experience that there is the benefits outweigh the challenges? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Ivan. Yeah, I mean, I do. I really think the benefits do outweigh the challenges. I think, and this may be just totally stating the obvious, but I think you just kind of want to be selective on who gets the keys to the red Corvette, that's kind of my starting point. Like maybe you designate kind of a project manager who in a sense is like coordinating, like here are all the things people want to do on the team. I'm going to be the single point of contact to think about them and maybe decide which ones we're going to do. And then of course, really getting access to that data, which of course has its own perils. You don't want everyone doing that all the time. So it may just be kind of a management issue of, almost like a product manager, project manager kind of person.
Thank you. And in the past, what I have seen a lot is the security by obscurity paradigm, where you don't tell anybody that we can have Trello integration, but that doesn't work now with people that are tech savvy or app savvy. So thanks for your comments.
Of course, yeah, I hope it's helpful.
Lovely. Well, here we are coming up towards the end of our hour. I think unless someone gets a last question in right now, we're going to go into the wrap-up process. So let me start that with just saying, like, Elliot, super grateful for you to come and share your expertise. Really happy for you to come and and give us a good sense of like, what is this no-code thing, an idea that's been percolating out there, but I think we're all trying to grasp onto it. And before I let you go, one question did come in from Darcy, who says, I work for a nonprofit where one of our funding requirements is that all personal information stay run on Canadian servers. Is there a list of any no-code platforms that maybe only use Canadian servers or perhaps are self-hosted? Do you have any knowledge around that?
My guess is that you could do that, but you'd be paying for the enterprise rate. So what you might want to do is get Eli to go out and negotiate with companies like Airtable and Zapier to see if they can offer that as part of a nonprofit package. Self-hosted things, none spring to mind that I particularly like. There's one called Odoo, I think. The risk there is across all self-hosted things, which is someone's got to maintain it. It's going to break. It's, I think for most organizations that are relatively small and don't have big tech teams, self-hosted can be kind of risky. So it's not my personal recommendation for that. But again, maybe TechSoup could help you guys get set up with some Canadian servers for these companies.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. This is the cruel act of asking some poor American to become an expert on our particular legal case. But I think that's a good thing for us to really think about and also to ask these platform providers, because, as others are noticing here, it used to be that things like Office 365 would all be just hosted in the US, but over time, through pressure from their clients, they have started to shard out the system so they have local hosting solutions to open up their ability to serve people who do have all kinds of regulatory requirements. Fabulous. Well, then let me wrap up. So know, friends, that here's what's going to happen. We're going to follow up with a video by the end of the week. So if you need to come back, find any of those links, see any of those demos again, that'll all be available to you. Otherwise, here's what you really need to know, which is to say this is going to be an unusual month for us. Check this out. Instead of just doing one event, we are going to do two. So we're going to be back again next week, bring back one of our more popular presenters from the past. And what we're going to do on September 14th is dig deep into Google Analytics, but not too deep because honestly, it's too big and scary. So rather what we're going to do is focus on the 25% of Google Analytics that you as a nonprofit really need to know so you can get a sense of what's actually happening with your web traffic and what parts are actually important. So join us again in a week's time and we'll be back for that event. Otherwise, let me reiterate that we totally need your help. So if you want to get involved, drop me a message there in the chat and I'd be happy to follow up with you. I've already had one person do so, which I'm excited about, but if we had two people, even better. And that is it for today. So with that, let me say that you get to go back to your lives and catch up on all the email you ignored over this last hour.
Thanks for having me, guys. Thanks to everyone for joining. I hope it was helpful. Take care.
Perfect. Catch you all. Thank you so much. And really grateful for everyone here who joined us on their lunch hour.
Thank you. Thank you.